Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Mormon Stories podcast. I'm your host, John DeLynn. It is February 23rd, 2022, and we are back for part two. I'm using my hands today of our interview with Lizzy and Spencer Bean. Hey, guys.
Hi.
Welcome back.
Thanks for having us again.
It's been like a hot minute.
I know.
It has been. The weather has gotten weird in the meantime.
So weird. It's like an apocalypse out there.
Yesterday was like super cold.
Yeah.
I was like, this is not a Utah winter.
Icy snow blowing everywhere.
Everywhere.
I was not
Our dogs did not know what to do with themselves when they had to go outside. It was like,
not a good thing.
no.
Yeah. Well, welcome back.
Thanks.
We really loved part one.
Thank you.
Hearing your story, Lizzy. And I think part two today, we're going to just be continuing right on. And now it's time for Spencer's story as part two. And then for part three, we're going to talk about your marriage and your faith journeys after marriage. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yep.
I think so. Our life together.
Yeah. And if this weren't enough awesomeness, we have with us Kara Burrell
Hey guys.
Hey.
Hey.
as co-host.
Hi guys.
Hi, Kara.
Yeah.
Good to see
Get
you.
into it.
I like your snazzy jacket.
Kara, you're looking very wintry. You're like Park City fresh.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was feeling like Spencer and I were trying to think of a good joke. I kind of looked like I was going to rob somebody while like hip hop breakdancing on a ski lift.
On the lift
all at once.
Yeah.
Yeah. So right in the comments
ski
below.
lift smuggler.
Yeah. She's funky fresh.
Do you even know who Groucho Marx is? Because you do Groucho Marx impressions, and I
do.
imagine.
I do.
Like, did you ever watch Groucho Marx?
I'm like enough to know that. Yeah, that's the thought.
Because like the difference between you and me is I actually watched Groucho Marx. Okay, and you just make the sounds, but you probably have no idea who you're imitating.
Yeah, I mean, I know the reference, but I'm not a fan. But like I didn't grow up on him or anything. So.
All right. Well, for those who didn't join us for part one, Lizzy told us this amazing story of being born into the church with convert parents, but growing up back east in upstate New York, all of her experiences with the Palmyra pageant, of being a Mormon, of eventually moving to Utah, moving to like Utah County of all places, the culture shock, being of Eastern sensibilities and moving to Provo.
Yep.
And becoming friends with someone, fast friends in high school.
Yeah.
Now you know how to get on Mormon Stories podcast. You be Kara Burrell's friend. No, I'm kidding. I vetted this. Kara would not bring an interview to me if it wasn't a quality individual. These are quality individuals. This has my pre-endorsement. No patronage here. Anyway, we talked about your experiences growing up in Provo, the culture shock, your Mormon experiences. And then kind of your pursuit of like theatrical arts and musical theater and just living the Mormon dream.
Yeah, living the Mormon dream.
Yeah.
Loving every second of it. Yeah.
And so we kind of left as you met Spencer, but now we have to do like a Wayne's World.
Hamilton reference. Rewind.
Rewind.
Now we'll take it right back to Spencer Story.
Kara, keep a tally of how musical theater references
on
happen.
cue.
Let's literally have as many theater references as we can.
Minutes
today.
since we didn't have a musical theater reference. 0. Always.
And Kara doesn't even like musical theater, so she's not even going to be able to participate.
I like doing it more than I like consuming it, so my references are limited.
We need to work on Kara, guys.
Okay.
We'll do it.
Because it's embarrassing. Kara told me she doesn't want to work with a boss who hasn't had certain experiences that she has recently had. Well, I'm not sure.
That sounded really weird if you don't.
I'm not sure if I want to work with an employee that doesn't like musical theater.
Well,
is that fair? I mean, honestly, is that fair?
It's a two-way street here.
It's got to be symbiotic.
That's equity is.
You need that common
give
frame
and
of
take.
reference,
All right. Well, with that, we're rewinding to Spencer's Mormon story. So, Spencer, where does your Mormon story begin?
My Mormon story begins in Provo, Utah.
What?
Yep.
That sounds very Mormon.
It is. It's honestly, my story is about as Mormon as I think you could probably get.
I'll be the judge of that.
Well, okay. Well, in that case, born in Utah Valley Hospital, Utah Valley Regional Medical Center. I think it may have been at the time. And my parents were at BYU at the time. My mom was on bed rest with me for a long time, and my dad was in his finals at BYU. He was studying computer science, and he was trying to get through school while his wife was in the hospital. And
what year?
1986.
So that's literally the year before I went to BYU. So our parents are, I mean, me and your parents are similar ages.
Right around the same age, yeah.
All right, so I'm trying. I like to think of years because then when you're telling me the story, I can think about like what was going on in the world and with Mormonism. You know. Anyway,
so my parents just sold about 6 months ago the house that I came home from the hospital to in Orem.
Where in Provo?
Orem. North Orem.
Okay.
Yeah, North Orem.
Lived in Orem, born in Provo.
Lived in Orem, born in Provo.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, my mom was a nurse growing up. She worked at the ER down at the hospital. She worked at newborn ICU for a while. And my dad was kind of a computer science guy and kind of entrepreneurial. And
so back at that time, WordPerfect was a really big deal.
He was working there,
Novell. So Novell and WordPerfect, for those who don't know, for younger folk, before Microsoft was huge, which is way before Facebook and YouTube and TikTok and all those other things. Utah,
a word processor.
Utah. Well, Novell was network operating system, and WordPerfect was a word processor, which was bigger than Microsoft Word way back in the day. Yeah. So if your dad was doing computer science, he would have been thinking Novell and WordPerfect. You're saying he worked.
He was, we lived the WordPerfect campus on like 1600
North Orem.
Yep. Yeah. We lived within walking distance. So my dad would just go down to work every day. And
now that's Qualtrics, right?
No, Qualtrics moved. Qualtrics is down in Riverwoods. That complex is now just kind of like disparate office buildings.
Okay,
a bunch of different offices are there. But I remember, going down and like hanging out with my dad at lunchtime at the cafeteria down at the WordPerfect campus. He eventually left WordPerfect and kind of struck out on his own a couple of times. But all told, like I said, my Mormon story is very, I would call it typical. Born into a family. I was the second of 4 kids. So by the time I was born, I had an older sister, 3 years older than I was. And we lived a very normal life. Went to church every Sunday in those church buildings with the scratchy carpet walls. I very vividly remember that. And I remember doing primary and learning primary songs and just kind of going through all of those regular motions. As a kid, my dad was called into a BYU bishopric, and I thought that was really cool because we got to go down to BYU every Sunday instead of going to the home ward. They had to like call specific people from the ward to be like the primary leaders because it was just a singles ward. And so I had a really fun time kind of doing church through that lens for a few years. I remember, have I told you this, the 3-strike policy? So my mom, in an effort to try to keep us quiet during church, we had a 3-strike policy. You had 3 scoops of ice cream. And if you didn't do anything that warranted losing a scoop, you got all 3 scoops at the end of
hot diggity.
We got home that day. So
Mormons consume more ice cream per capita, I think, than almost anybody.
Yeah. Look at the BYU
more
Creamery.
treats.
I love that stuff so much.
Yep.
Oh. But yeah, so I very, very kind of idyllic childhood, honestly, growing up. We had a few neighbors growing up who right across the street was a non-member, and then right kind of sharing the backyard was a non-member. And I remember as a kid being a little wary of those people. They smoke, they drank, smoked, they smoke.
They might still, we don't know.
They still could. But they smoked, they drank, and it was, I had a really hard time kind of reconciling that because my parents were really, really kind of, I would call them very nuanced, especially for the time. They were trying to help us understand that family members that we had or neighbors that we had who weren't members of the church were still good people. My mom's family was kind of half and half in the church and out of the church. Some had been members of the church and were no longer. But I had one of my favorite aunts who lived in Colorado. She smoked and she drank, and it was always hard for me as a kid to kind of make sense of how she's a good person and we love her, but at the same time, she's doing these things that will not let her into heaven. So that was always just kind of a weird thing. And to my parents' credit, they always tried to get over that, but you know, when you're going to primary every week and you are hearing about all the things that good people are supposed to do and all the bad things that you should not do, it was really easy to kind of fall into that black and white thinking and that black and white narrative of good versus bad and good people versus bad people. And then things probably get the most interesting around when I was probably 11 or 12. My dad was called as the home ward bishop in Orem, and he was working on his own business at the time. He had left Word Perfect. He was starting his own thing, and he was so consumed by the calling and his work that on Christmas Day, that first year that he was bishop, on Christmas Day, we opened presents, and then he looked at my mom and he said, "I think I need to go to the hospital." And so we went to the hospital after opening presents, and he had pneumonia and was in the hospital for about a week, I think, recovering from that. And I remember thinking, why is my dad spending so much time at church? Like, I was young. At that point, all 4 siblings were born. And it was hard for me to wrap my head around why I couldn't see my dad all the time. I remember as a kid on a Sunday afternoon wanting to run in to see my dad. And so I rode my bike up to the church building in the middle of interviews and just like barged into the office just to see my dad and say hi. And there was a lady there talking to my dad. She was in full tears, and she kind of whipped around and looked at me, and I kind of was deer in the headlights, and my dad kind of tried to shoo me out the door. And then an executive secretary came around and kind of ushered me out. And I was really frustrated because like I really wanted to see my dad, and that was hard. But my dad being a bishop was an interesting. I'm sure you've talked to lots of people whose dads were bishops when they were kids, and the ward looks at you differently. I really liked the treats that you would get at Christmas. Everyone loved to take care of the bishop and the bishop's family, so that was really great.
Treats on treats on treats.
Treats on treats on treats.
And it was hard for your mom too. I remember
Yeah.
like it just.
And honestly, my parents have always made like a really great team together. Yeah. And so to watch my mom support my dad in that calling and doing the bishop's wife thing, you know, that unofficial calling of being the listening ear for people, it really helped me realize that my parents were doing good things, and my parents were helping people, and it was really great. And then I fell into a bit of a rebellious phase, and I think it just happened that I was in kind of a rougher group of friends at the time in my local neighborhood. Well, now you can see water
dripping water.
Reminds me of the airplane. I have a drinking problem. Did you ever see that?
Oh, yeah.
He throws the water over his shoulder.
And don't call me Shirley.
Don't call me Shirley. But yeah,
Spencer the Rebel Kid.
Yeah, and it's so stupid to think about because, again, you know, bishop's kid in Orem, Utah, like what do I have to be rebellious about? But I really butted heads with my parents at the time. I was listening to a lot of Dave Matthews Band, and I was feeling real angsty. Dave was the man.
Yeah, he gets it.
And I'd like, that's when I had my first CD player, and I could like have multiple CDs at a time.
You're wearing puka shells.
I had puka shells. I was doing the whole thing. And it was hard for my dad, especially because I wasn't necessarily not interested in church kind of as a kid, but that rebellious phase made it really hard to have a relationship with my dad, especially when he was bishop. And so the big problem was how to have conversations with my dad and how to have any sort of conversation about the church in general when my dad was the bishop. And so he actually did what I think is a really smart thing. He told one of his counselors to kind of be my pseudo-bishop, I would say. And so instead of meeting with my dad for worthiness interviews, I would meet with his counselor. And that kind of put some nice distance between me and my dad and gave us a little space to breathe. I think he was just really stressed at the time. Like looking back, he was running his own business. He was trying to keep this ward alive. And of course, he didn't say much about the problems that people in the home ward were facing, but I could tell that he would come home just drained from interviews on weeknights and on Sundays. And so, bless his heart, I think he was under a lot of stress. As a kid, also, I was diagnosed with Tourette syndrome and OCD, so that offered an extra layer of complexity to the whole situation. of me just being very impulsive and needing a lot of attention that I couldn't always get. And again, my mom working as a nurse, my siblings, my dad as bishop, we did the best we could, I would say, growing up. Like we did family home evening, we did kind of all the regular things, but it was hard. It was hard to make it work from like a logistical perspective.
I'm just thinking about this as a parent now. Like I felt like my parents maybe weren't as involved in my life as I wanted to be, as I wanted them to be. And so like I made this commitment, and Margie is the most involved mom ever. And so we kind of, so we've tried to be really, really super involved parents. And what I've noticed is there's a balance between being over involved. Well, there's a balance between being under involved and having your kids feel like you really weren't involved, but also allowing them to develop self-sufficiency.
Right.
And parents being over involved and kids either feeling smothered or not learning a lot of the things they needed to learn by parents kind of letting them learn their lessons and kind of be independent. Right. And so I don't know how to find that perfect balance. But as you talk about that, on the one hand, I think, oh man, that's a bummer. Over-involved dad, dad and mom neglected kid. And on the other hand, I'm like, well, there might have been good and bad things about that.
Absolutely. And to my parents' credit, so I was diagnosed with Tourette's and OCD. My younger sister was diagnosed autistic. And so she was going to like speech behavioral places up in Salt Lake. So my parents were driving every single day up to Salt Lake to drop her off and then home and then up to Salt Lake to pick her up every single day.
Okay, wait, when were you diagnosed with OCD?
I was probably 7 or 8.
Yeah.
Childhood OCD is super rare.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So things must have been intense.
Things were intense.
Yeah.
I was the kind of kid who would always check the doors and check the stove before I went to bed to make sure that no one was going to break in.
So safety OCD.
Yeah,
Safety police.
safety OCD was my thing. And also like socks. I couldn't put on socks. I would spend 20 minutes putting on socks and shoes in the morning because the seam on the sock had to be perfect.
So kind of symmetry OCD.
Yeah, symmetry.
Yeah.
And I had some vocal tics
Wow.
that were tough. So that paired with my sister needing her attention for her therapies and my dad being bishop and entrepreneurial and my mom working as a nurse, it was just a lot. And like I said, I looking back, I think my parents did absolutely the best they could. And I had a great childhood and I really liked the church. I really liked going to church. I really liked being involved in church activities and going to the campouts and the mutual and things like that. I really liked it. And it was a nice way to feel connected to the ward. And it was a nice way to feel connected also to my family because when your dad's the bishop, I kind of felt not responsible for the ward, but that my family had some sort of responsibility for the ward as well. But like I said, that rebellious phase was tough because they were trying really hard to juggle all these different things, and it just was not going super well for me specifically. And I did a summer camp around that time in Orem. It was like the Orem Police Department put on some sort of summer camp thing, and I met some really cool other kids my age there. And when I went, I was going to Canyon View Junior High at the time. No, sorry, I was going to Oak Canyon at the time. And had that
Lots of canyons.
So many canyons in Utah. Lots of canyons. And I was going to Oak Canyon and had just a rougher group of friends that weren't bad, and they weren't bad people. It wasn't the kind of influence that my parents wanted for my life. And they thought that one of the best things they could do would be to pull me out of Oak Canyon and send me to Canyon View, where all these really cool kids that I had met during that summer camp were going to school. So halfway through 8th grade, my parents pulled me out of Oak Canyon, sent me to Canyon View, and I hated it. I hated that transition. I hated my parents for doing that. That just like further drove that wedge between, me and my parents, and especially me and my dad. And it was really hard, kind of starting over fresh and learning new, meeting new people, meeting new friends at school. But I slowly got ingratiated with a really great group of people who, to this day, a lot of them are still very, very close friends. And when ninth grade started, I asked my mom if I could go back to Oak Canyon to see all my other friends. And I had evened out just enough that my parents were okay with that. They said, if you want to go and do that, yeah, you're more than welcome. And so I did. And I spent the first few days of ninth grade at Oak Canyon, and I hated it. I missed all of my friends. I missed all the teachers. I missed the band opportunities. I really loved doing jazz band at Canyon View. So I jumped on my bike after about a week of school and rode down to Canyon View and knocked on the principal's door. And I said, can I please come back to your school? She said, does your mom know you're here? I said, no. But you've got to take me back. And I did. And that was probably one of the best decisions that my parents made on my behalf and that I then got to make on my behalf as well. That set me up for a lot of success in life. Again, just a really great group of friends.
I just got chills. Like when kids pay attention to what they need, and when kids voice their needs, and when parents listen and are supportive, that can be a transformative experience for all involved.
And that's what it was. And I think that's what ultimately really made that a positive experience, because I had gone kicking and screaming to that school change. All of my friends were still at Oak Canyon, and I only knew like a handful of people at Canyon View, and it was a weird school and it was farther away, and it didn't jive. But the fact that, that they did give me the opportunity to choose that for myself, I think made a massive difference. And I really would consider that choice and kind of the beginning of ninth grade as the big turning point in my life. And I started getting along better with my parents. My dad would only be bishop for another few years. And at that point, he had kind of gotten into a rhythm, and my sister's therapy was going well. So things had kind of settled down at home. And I really felt like I could connect with my parents and my family, and that we were all kind of getting along. Let's see, I'm just going to look at my notes here. And around that time, about the time that I kind of turned my life around, I say that really kind of nonchalantly, but I really do feel like I made a trajectory switch. And that's the point at which I was called as Teachers Quorum president. And I, for the first time in my life, wanted to just dive into the church all the way. I wanted to do everything. I wanted to read all the scriptures. I wanted to do all the things. I wanted to have all the callings and help everybody that I possibly could. And I magnified that calling. I have never put so much time and effort into anything in my life up to that point. I really took it as just a solemn responsibility to look over the other boys in the quorum and to work with the leaders to plan really meaningful camping trips and things that would help increase the testimony of everybody else in the quorum. We would go up to Temple Square and we would, go see the Testaments, or I remember a really great camp out. We went ice kind of, igloo camping, and we all the boys, it was probably 7:00. It was really dark. And the leader said, okay, everyone go find your own secluded spot in the snow somewhere. Just, we were in the middle of nowhere. Go find your own secluded spot, and in a half hour, we'll blow a whistle and you can all come back. But in that time, we want you to pray. We want you to meditate. We want you to, develop a real connection with your Heavenly Father. And I remember sitting there and again, for the first time, really feeling like I had a connection to Heavenly Father. Really feeling like there is something out there. I've heard about it, and I think I feel it for the first time. And that was a really cool time for me. And like I said, this was on the heels of kind of turning my life around and getting that really good group of friends. And there was a really awesome leader too, Scott Lupke. He was phenomenal. And he was probably my biggest cheerleader at that time. He saw the potential, to help not turn the quorum around, but he saw the potential to help me help the quorum. And he really tried to do as much as he could to facilitate that for me. And to this day, he's just one of the biggest influences on my life and one of the nicest guys I've ever known.
As I'm thinking about just processing your experience, it brings up so much for me. So like from a positive standpoint, youth leaders and young men's leaders during that age were so formative for me.
Totally.
Just
Absolutely.
men that were cool, that I respected, that showed genuine love and interest for me. Yeah. I think that's one of I mean, it's kind of a timely topic, but like the youth programs in our church, when they're functioning well, are like unparalleled.
Oh, yeah.
And so many people, I am certain, stay in the church because there's nothing like that outside. In post-Mormonism. There's no youth program like it.
Right.
And it's a real loss in many ways. Now, there's also the cost of indoctrination, and I want to talk about that in just a second.
Yeah.
Right.
But like, I was in the teachers' quorum presidency and in the deacons' quorum presidency. Most 12, 13, 14-year-old boys, what are they thinking about? Girls, or they're thinking about sports, or they're thinking about TV or video games. You're like, how do I make my quorum better? How do I work with this leader guy and sit in presidency meetings? And how do we get Johnny out to church? And how do we get Billy? Billy's feeling bullied. How do we help the boys not be so mean? Like, that's amazing leadership development. That's amazing mentorship.
Absolutely.
Right.
It's teaching a kid kindness and organizational skills, or it's making a kid stressed out and feel unworthy.
Right.
But like, anyway, when
With
it's
one comes the other.
Yeah, little bit of both.
But that's also not a bad thing to have to face and learn how to deal with. That when, I don't feel like I'm up to this task, or this is too much responsibility, or imposter syndrome never goes away in the course of your whole life. So
face it early.
Face it and get, and work with mentors who care about you, about like, no, you're doing your best and that's enough. It's all part of it.
Yeah.
It's all part of it. And even down to the public speaking of it, getting in front of the congregation and talking and teaching your peers and teaching classes.
Giving talks.
It's extraordinary.
And honestly,
skills.
staying out of trouble. Learning to be honest, learning to not be, not vandalize things, to treat other people with respect. Like, so many important values. Like, it's making me miss being Mormon, honestly. Hearing you talk about that. Why are you laughing, Kara? You're laughing.
Oh, just because I have this old adage that I used to think of, that so much of my testimony when I was Mormon had to do with not wanting to disappoint my leaders, if I was being honest.
Yeah.
Like, I love these people and they have a genuine love for me.
You had good leaders.
I had really good leaders.
Yeah, you had like remarkable feminist,
Like, I can attest.
feminist, educated women.
Yeah,
right?
like BYU professor, nurse, career women who were
That's
like
why you're
working
such
outside
a
the
cool
home.
human. You had good leaders.
I did, and I had a great group of friends and things. And if the church to you is the people who are teaching it to you, it's kind of whatever that group decides to teach you, what values that they implement in their lives and what they're teaching in the school. And like I've said, I never got any of the purity lessons because they would have like laid their body outside of the Sunday school
Keep that from happening.
get the chewing gun lesson never be taught. Like, that never would have happened.
Right.
Because of the leaders. They want to teach the best values of what they see as the most Christ-like version of the church doctrine. And it really comes down to, for me, like, not wanting to disappoint them. So.
Yeah. And Kara, you also reminded me of something. Like, I don't know about you guys, but Kara, we share a bit of a similar upbringing in the fact that we kind of had a crazy family. A little bit of a crazy, in my case, my parents got divorced and multiple divorces, and I was kind of on my own. So the church raised me when my parents literally didn't have the bandwidth to even think about it. Kara, you probably got your own story with your parents and family and siblings, but like, when your parents might be able to offer you a subpar upbringing, then the church freaking fills in.
Yeah.
And like, again, post-Mormonism, maybe I can find a pod because I have 100,000 listeners and I can pick people I want to hang out with.
Yeah.
But like, there's all sorts of people that like, they don't have church or some organized religion. They don't have a network of close friends.
Right.
And then they're just on their own. And then their kids, if those parents aren't doing well, those kids are just out of luck. They're just suffering.
Right.
So like, anyway, so much good. I'm loving talking about this.
And truly, like, foundational of all the things that come and go in your life as a kid. Friends come and go, and birthdays come and go, and school comes and goes. Church was always the constant. Church was always kind of the rock and the foundation. You could always rely on church, and you could always rely on seeing those really great leaders who you would walk in, 5 minutes before sacrament meeting started and the organ's playing, and you're kind of looking around to see if your friends are there. And then like, you see that really cool leader who like waves to you and like winks at you, and you kind of go, I'm cool. Like, that guy knows who I am. And
we're all here
finger
together.
guns, and like, we're all here together. We're all doing the same thing. It was idyllic. It really was. It was so special. And I have nothing but fond memories of all of the wonderful leaders who helped make my experience as a kid in the church truly remarkable. Yeah.
And then I just have to, I know we're drilling here, but this is fun for me. So you talk about that experience where you were encouraged to go off and have your own little prayer meditation moment where you can have a spiritual epiphany. And we talked in just a recent episode about how they do that at the Sacred Grove, where they'll tell Mormon youth, that was you, where they'll tell the Mormon youth to go off and pray and have, okay, maybe there's a Heavenly Father who's Mormon that is communicating with you. Or if you want to look at it from more of a deconstruction kind of like secular lens, that like getting in touch with who you are and having private meditation moments can be really powerful.
Your mind, being in nature.
And that's just part of the human experience. And of course, either the Holy Ghost is ubiquitous or that's just a human emotional kind of, what is it, flow? What is the elevation emotion experience? That then these leaders are basically saying, without knowing it, in their minds, they're sending you off to have a spiritual experience. What they're really doing is setting you up to have an elevation emotion experience and priming you to associate that with there being, quote, a love of the Heavenly Father, which is also priming you to believe that this is the one true church so that can lock you into a lifetime of devotion. So it's,
and I like that you said they don't even necessarily know that that's what they're doing. No, it's not sinister. No, it's because that's what they did and it worked for them and their lives are great. And so they want you to have that too. And that connection of personal revelation and just like Joseph prayed in the grove, you go pray in the grove and you can see what that might have felt like. And it's not a bad thing.
It's not pernicious. It's not premeditated evil. No. It's sincere teachings.
It's really meant well, but
that by a high demand religion, but what it's experienced as, if someone's conscious, is indoctrination. That then becomes undue influence because you're a minor. Let's face it. You're 14, you're 16, your parents aren't around, and you're being indoctrinated. EFY is the same thing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Have these emotional. You talked about EFY, right?
Yeah, I didn't attend. You did.
I
did the music
EFY.
summer
talked about
camp.
EFY recently, Kara. Anyway, we talked about that in a recent episode.
But that is what it is. Girls camp, scout camp, EFY, all that stuff is.
My ward did a Zion's camp.
Yeah.
And we
Well, that's next level. You must be extra righteous.
I legit, yes. Like that's what I thought. Like my ward's doing Zion's camp. Like this is, we're going all out on this, super planned thing. And it was really great. I had nothing but great experiences,
So it's well-intended. Yeah. It's sincere. It actually has a positive impact,
It does.
at least until it doesn't.
Right.
And it's highly manipulative.
Yeah.
And it's kind of undue influence. It's both.
Right.
And that's honestly, that right there, I think encapsulates it's not black or white.
Right.
It is both. It's not one or the other. It is actually both. And as a kid, being sent out into the wilderness to go have a spiritual experience, relatively unstructured. I mean, they didn't say all they said was go out and pray. Just go find your Heavenly Father out there. Yeah, it wasn't like, now here's, start with a hymn and start with a prayer. And then it was very unstructured. And again, like I said, for the first time in my life, I really felt a connection to something bigger than myself. And I can't deny that. And it was a really wonderful experience. And it gave me a lot of confidence to rely on myself and my own interpretation of spiritual experiences. But like you say, it does prime you to think of, great, well, when you feel those emotions, it's associated with the church. Yeah. It's associated with God. It's associated with prophets. It's associated with the hymns. And it really does kind of wrap you up in that. I loved it. I loved being wrapped up in that.
Exactly.
It was phenomenal.
And it's amazing. And I think it's actually, for many, healthy.
Absolutely.
There's that Richard Rohr concept that there's first half of life and second half of life. And in the first half of life, it doesn't matter. You need a structure Doesn't matter what the structure is. Judaism, Catholicism, evangelical Christianity, secularism, thoughtful. It doesn't matter. Give your kids some structure to grow up in, and then they'll have a faith crisis in whatever they were raised in.
Right.
But give them a structure because there is something worse. First of all, no structure is perfect. Second of all, there is something worse than imperfect structure, and that's no structure.
Yeah.
Right? So you got a good structure, but, spiritual experience leads to scriptures are true, leads to prophets are true, leads to the church is true.
Confirmation bias
leads to give us 10% for the rest of your life and give us 2 years of your mission and make all these life decisions that will affect you forever. Right. So it's like this funnel, not in an insidious way, but it's this funnel that you get into, and then you wake up when you're 33 and you're saying, and you're literally saying, where, how did I get here?
Yeah.
But, and like you said, it's great until it's not. And I was thrilled to spend so much time in presidency meetings and at EFY and on campouts and on my mission. Like I was so excited about these aspects of the church. I definitely, as a kid, would look at the prophet and think, I'll bet I could be the prophet someday. I'll bet I could get there. At least a general authority. Like, if I play my cards right, I could work my way up.
We all wanted that. I did. I wanted that. I wanted to be an apostle for sure.
Who wouldn't?
Who didn't?
Me.
Yeah. Because you're a freaking girl.
I had this epiphany. This was only like a few months ago. We were sitting around in the living room, and I looked at Spencer, and I was like, Spence, it just that whole thing dawned on me. I said, when you were a little boy, did you think you could be prophet someday? And he was like, oh yeah. And I think we had a friend over at the time who was like, oh yeah, obviously. And I was like, how strange is it that I have no doubt in my mind that I could be president of the United States someday, but it never once crossed my mind as a female that I could ever be a leader in the church.
Yeah.
Like that and that's like we both kind of went like,
whoa.
Ooh.
That's weird.
Yeah.
Wrong anatomy. Sorry,
right.
sister.
That's it. Just born with the wrong pieces.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the only difference.
You could write like a really killer cookbook that sold a lot of Deseret book, like a liter of funeral potatoes.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever like think about being General Relief Society president or like General Primary president or anything like that?
No, not at all. Because first of all, like I sort of mentioned in my half of the episode, is I didn't fit that mold. Like I know I didn't look like them. I don't have like the blonde, you know what I mean? I don't talk like them. And also it just never was all that appealing. Like they don't do anything, they speak at the Young Women's General Conference, but back as I was growing up, like women weren't praying in General Conference. You get like one female speaker in General Conference. It just, it didn't portray an image of actually being able to have any sort of like impact in a meaningful way. But I'm telling you, as a kid, I was definitely one of those kids that was like, I could be president of the United States. I really absorbed that. I could be an astronaut. I mean, I was like, I can do anything. I can be anything. Not in the church though. And that is a subconscious thing that really only came to the forefront like within the last like 6 months to a year, where I realized just how subconscious that messaging is.
Right, just kind of how limiting it is.
Yeah.
And that's
But I love that for you.
Well, and I was going to say, and that's not my experience.
Right.
It
just makes me laugh that like, because we're both so similar in that way of I can do the things, I can be the things.
Right.
And for you, that meant prophet. Like that meant the guy next to God. Like what a cool aspiration.
Right. Truly, as a kid, nothing was off limits for me. I could be the prophet. I could be anything, especially
with a bishop dad
and a
patriarch grandfather. You're on the highway.
I already had a foot in the door.
Yeah.
I never even thought twice that couldn't be an option. That wouldn't be a thing for me.
Will you do me a favor real quick? I know that you have an acting background, and Kara, you can be involved in this too. So it wasn't until like the past 15, 17 years where someone called my attention to the fact that there's such thing as like a Relief Society presidency voice or a church primary presidency voice.
She's got it.
Because when you talk about like having the wrong color hair or the wrong
I don't sound
diction,
like them. Yeah.
I was like, what's that voice? Can either of you try to imitate what is? And let me just be clear. This is not in the spirit of mocking anyone.
It is simply what it is.
It's in the spirit of identifying how the church signals what is the ideal appearance and form of speech? Because we all know
to be a woman in the church.
We all know general authorities have it. Like you hear general authority voices. Brothers and sisters. You know, so women
very
have the equivalent
deep,
thing. So how do you experience what primary presidency, primary general presidency voice is?
Women in the church. So,
or do you even want to try? And
Carrie, it's not even a try, John. I will deliver.
Okay.
So just by way of comparison, if I were to give a talk in church, and I loved doing it, I loved it, and I always got compliments, it would sound very much like this. You know, good morning, everybody. I am so excited to talk to you today. I've been thinking a lot about the subject of charity and Christ-like love. This is how I would deliver my talk.
Maybe a Groucho Marx in there.
No. Versus if you put on General Conference and you have a female speaker, either in the General Young Women's Relief Society or Primary Presidency. It is a very delicate, soft-spoken, very precious voice. And it would be this. Brothers and sisters, it is so special to be up here with you today. I love you, sisters, and I want to encourage you to be strong and to be true to your hearts and to the Lord.
I'm flashed back to conference. Like
I don't talk like that.
Crazy.
I don't talk like that. I don't talk like that when I pray. I don't talk like that in real life.
Part of that East Coast
nobody wants to hear.
mentality.
I was gonna say nobody wants to hear this over the pulpit, apparently. but if you whisper, and if you get, and sometimes if it's extra spiritual, you have a little fry in your voice because you're right on the verge of tears, and that's how you know you feel the Spirit, because you're about to cry. And if you're about to cry, you're very righteous. And what's interesting is subconsciously...
Is that a TikTok clip, Kara? Just checking.
Oh, gosh. I'm sorry, everyone who talks like that. No, but what's interesting is, and you'll notice, like, this was one of the culture shock things. I don't know if you noticed this growing up in Utah, but...
we just hijacked Spencer's whole
I know.
story.
But
I love it because this is fun. We're having fun. Sorry, Spencer.
It relates to this story of you going off, you're at your camp, you're going off into the thing.
Having your own
experience.
First vision experience.
Because Girls Camp does a similar thing. And at the end of the week, there's this big testimony meeting. And I would just sit there like this about it because girls would get up there and just start crying as though that was the signal of their righteousness. And you hear it oftentimes. There's prayer voice, there's talk voice, where people feel that they have to, because these are our leaders and they all kind of look the same and they all kind of talk the same. So you sort of subconsciously learn to manufacture these spiritual experiences. Well, I must be feeling the Spirit because I feel like I'm about to cry.
Voice cracks.
That might be a fear of public speaking, but you're not even thinking about that. It's just, it might be nervousness. Nope, it's the Spirit because I'm about to cry. That means Spirit. And I just would.
Or on the other hand, it can be performative.
Like you can get people, like
not that people are intentionally deceiving.
No,
but it's just like, wow.
But that's kind of what's expected.
I think it is totally subconscious. Like I really do.
Sure.
And that's what I mean. I think it's just absorbed.
Like Henry Eyring is like the mascot of like the trembly voice.
How he can cry or how he can talk through the crying. I've always just thought that was incredible. But I was great at manufacturing spiritual experiences. From that first camp out where we did kind of have our own little first vision-esque experiences out in the snow, I was always looking for ways to incorporate those kinds of experiences into the teacher's quorum and then into the priest's quorum and like into my group of friends. I was looking for ways to feel the Spirit, and I was looking for ways to it sounds really clinical, but to manufacture that and to put things in place and to talk in such a way, because you can really set a tone with an opening prayer. You can really set a tone for a meeting, for a class, for whatever it is, by kind of getting into that special voice. And you don't hear people saying, "Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this day. This is such a cool day. So glad to be here at church. Thanks for all the blessings. Please.
Yeah.
Please.
I mean, that's a C minus.
That's
like
a B.
It's a C,
how
B
dare
minus.
You speak normally.
That's just. Are you feeling anything? Where's the Holy Ghost? The Holy Ghost just isn't even in the room.
As a Utah kid, you say, "Dear Heavenly Father, we're thankful for this day. We're thankful for all of our many blessings. We're grateful to be here at church. And even that is like, that's a little too casual.
I am not
me.
impressed. Your spirit level is like D.
I mean, I know people whose voices like drop low, they start talking slow, or the women, get into that whisper.
Right.
Dear Heavenly Father.
And
we're so thankful.
And again, that is,
and we're not mocking. This is just how it's communicated.
Exactly. It just is what it is.
Not only am I not mocking, I loved that because what that meant, what that signaled to me was, this is spiritual.
Yeah. We're turning it on now.
This is church. Like general conference as a kid, my parents, we didn't dress up, for general conference. We would sit in our pajamas on the sofa. But I loved laying down with a pillow and blanket and just kind of dozing through conference. But it was the voices that it felt safe. It felt nice.
Reverent voice.
It felt
Reverent
normal.
voice,
It felt
yes.
reverent. It felt spiritual. It felt good.
We even have those hymns. The chapel door seemed to say to me, shh, be still.
Oh, that's how you sang it? I sang it, shh, shut up.
That's Kara. For this is a reverent place to be. Shh. Right?
Yeah.
Be still. There are many things. Anyway.
And there's something to be said for that. I mean, like quietness is, you go to a
reverence.
cathedral, it's quiet.
Yeah.
Like places of worship, places of meditation, places of even libraries where thinking is happening, introspection is happening. Quietness does help facilitate that. So again, it's one of these things that's not inherently bad.
No. And to this day, I seek out as much silence as I possibly can.
Yeah.
Must be nice. No, kids.
Now I see why you guys don't hang around Kara as much as she might want. No, I'm kidding.
I mean, I really do value my quiet time and kind of always have. And I do think that stems back to the church. And like you were saying, John, earlier, that it's such a great framework. Whether or not you understand the indoctrination aspect of it, it is a phenomenal framework for leadership development, for keeping you out of trouble, for teaching you how to pray and meditate and to be reverent and silent. It's just when all of those things get so deeply ingrained and then can be turned on you a little bit, that's when it gets a little hairy.
Yeah, and I'm glad that we're starting, like with Lizzy's experience in the church, very positive, Spencer's as well. And I'm glad that we're starting with this framework of a lot of healthy experiences. And as we'll get into, I had healthy experiences, John did too, that there must be, if it's that healthy, there must be a reason why you can't physically be in that church anymore. And we're going to get into that, obviously, in part 3.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But we're not talking that every moment in the church was just agony.
No.
It's quite the opposite. And I think maybe people like Latter-day Saints in the church or something, they think that there's something internal, whether you're like LGBTQ or like have too many feminist leanings or something just makes you like at odds with the church and the doctrine and being a member of the church.
Or you wanted to sin, or you couldn't keep the commandments, or you weren't committed.
Totally.
You weren't committed enough.
You didn't have a spiritual experience or whatever.
Yeah.
And I just love that we've laid out in Lizzy's story and then Spencer's already that's just not the case, that like you had a positive experience.
All 4 of us loved our Mormon upbringings.
Loved
All
it,
4
loved our leaders, loved our callings, loved this, like felt the spirit, had a testimony.
And we're committed.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Super committed.
Yeah.
Loved it. And I mean, and this is a little foreshadowing too, both of our positive experiences with being youths and having great leaders in the youth programs, we got snagged right up as young marrieds to be teachers of youth. And we're
getting ahead.
I know we're getting ahead, but I'm just saying it set us up to want to give back in that capacity. Because we had such a good experience ourselves, we wanted to be that for other people. Like it does, when it's good, it is so good, and it can continue to perpetuate good. And yeah, like you said, there isn't always an inherent rub that would cause a problem. Right. It just wasn't there for us.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the church can provide a lot of good things that give you a healthy structure to go about the rest of your life on. So
yeah, the framework, just like John said.
And I attribute the church to so much good in my life. So a lot of the skills that I've learned, the way that I was able to stay out of trouble as a kid, that really helped me. Once I had changed schools and found that new group of friends, they were all very into the church, and once I turned like 16 and I could start driving and stuff, my focus changed. I was less interested in like leading the teachers' quorum and leading that charge, because when I went to high school, because I had changed schools in junior high, all of my friends were going to Orem High School when I lived in Timpanogos high school boundaries. And it was not even a choice for me which high school I would go to. Of course, I was going to go to Orem High. I didn't even really entertain the option of going to Timpanogos. And what that meant was that all of the people at church were going to a different school. So my day-to-day school experience was really disconnected from my church experience. And so I kind of stopped going to Mutual because I had theater practice or I had band practice. There were so many extracurricular activities around that time in my life that it was hard to get plugged into the local ward. And so I then started to really rely on my group of close friends there in high school. And we would go tunnel singing at BYU, and we would
in high school.
In high school, yeah. We'd drive down.
So explain what that is.
Oh,
yeah,
it sounds really weird.
Tunnel singing. Out of context, that is weird. No, we drive down to just right by the Marriott Center, and they had
basketball stadium.
Yeah, the basketball stadium on BYU campus in Provo, and they had some tunnels, just for students to walk under. I think was it cars going over the. Anyway, there was a tunnel there, not a super long tunnel, but kids would get together, mostly college kids would get together on, Sunday nights, I think it was.
Yeah, usually.
And everyone would bring a hymn book, and then you would just sing hymns a cappella. And it was so lovely.
And it echoed. Like it was just
it would
ambient.
just reverberate around. And you were on BYU campus, and you were around other people who loved this stuff as much or more than you did. And so I really looked for a lot of those opportunities to replace kind of the homeward activities that I was missing out on, because I wasn't going to Mutual, and I did start to miss that connection that I'd had with those boys in the teachers' quorum. I was now relying on friends from school. So we were doing tunnel singing. We were sending email threads between our group of friends. Someone would be assigned to, like, on Tuesday morning before school, you send out the scripture of the week, and pick a scripture that you like and give some thoughts on it. And we'll all
totally
read it.
Self-motivated?
Absolutely self-motivated.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, totally.
You high achiever.
Absolutely, because I loved it.
Yeah.
And I truly thought that this was the best thing I could be doing with my life.
Yeah.
I really did.
Yeah.
And so, looking at my notes here.
Can I ask? So, how did your OCD progress through your teenage years? Were you able to seek therapy and be able to lessen the symptoms?
And did it convert to
severity?
scrupulosity or something else? I'm wondering.
Yes.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to cut you off. If you had another part of your question.
You guys are just on the same choo-choo train of thought.
This is the exact words I was going to add. You loved it and you were all invested in the church. Did it transition to religious OCD at any point?
Honestly, I've never tried to pick that apart. Let me do that in real time. As soon as I was diagnosed Tourette's and OCD, I immediately started seeing a psychiatrist, and I was on Zoloft pretty quickly. I tended to have really crazy mood swings throughout the year at high emotional times, like holidays, start of school, end of school. Those were just really rough times for me. It just felt really overwhelmed was the word that I could use to describe it at the time. And so being on medication through elementary school into junior high and then into high school, I feel like the tics really did start to calm down. And I don't have any visible tics that I'm aware of. Every once in a while, I'll get an eye blink or something like that will stick around for a little bit.
High stress times.
But it's usually high stress times. But the OCD specifically.
So scrupulosity would manifest as hyper conscientiousness, hyper confessing to your bishop about things that are just minor. It's uber religiosity that far exceeds your peers, like studying scriptures 3 or 4 hours a day, praying for literally hours a day, or just a really sharpened conscience where you brush up against a girl or a woman and you think, well, maybe I touched her, maybe I, and you didn't.
Right.
But in your mind, you start thinking you did. So we're not trying to make you endorse that.
And I never got that. I was never an uber studier. I was never an uber prayer. So I wouldn't say that it specifically turned into scrupulosity in that way.
That's fine.
But what I did have was a very, very deep-seated sense of justice. If it wasn't fair, I would fight it tooth and nail. And my poor parents would have to look at me and say, I'm so sorry, life's not fair.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I mean,
that's a good intervention, actually.
Yeah. And I kept thinking like, hey, but it's got to be fair. This is such an easy thing to make fair. And so when it came to church stuff, sins or anything to confess to a bishop, I was always very upfront with any priesthood leaders about anything that I was dealing with, any struggles I may have had.
Yeah. What about struggles in terms of shelf items? Did you have anything that piled on your shelf in your teenage years you can remember?
And we always ask about law of chastity stuff too.
Right. As a young white male in the millennial, you come across pornography, you run into masturbation at some point, and I would be so surprised to know if any of my friends in high school did not also at some point, run into pornography or masturbation or something like that. Kind of like you said, just as a kid with an email account in the 90s.
You're gonna get spam and go, what's this?
But so I would talk to bishops about that kind of thing. Sorry, what was your specific question? I have already lost it.
We can do on law of chastity first, and then we'll go to the shelf items.
Oh, shelf items. That's right. Yeah, so law of chastity, we'll just wrap that.
Sounds like it wasn't a big deal.
It wasn't. No, okay. It wasn't a big deal.
We're not fishing for it. We just ask about it.
I wouldn't say any more than just kind of a typical
normal Mormon kid.
Normal Mormon kid.
If it wasn't tormenting you, it doesn't matter.
Right. Yeah. And it wasn't.
But I do think that quote unquote normal Mormon experience does have an element of torment to it that like non-religious kids who come across pornography or who masturbate as teenagers or whatever don't deal with.
Sure.
I mean, because for us, it's like, oh shoot, I talked to my bishop about that last week and here I go again. Like, do I bring it up again? And now I'm a problem child for the bishop.
Right.
Like there is that element of guilt and shame.
No, we talk about that all the time.
Yeah.
It's just not all our.
Shouldn't I be over this?
I've talked to my bishop a couple of times.
But it's only an issue if it's an issue.
Exactly. So within the Mormon context, it's just the normal thing.
Yeah.
In the world context, it was maybe a little toxic.
Yeah,
but.
sure.
I do. So a big shelf item for me, Kara, actually around this time was, I remember my dad had been released as bishop and I was going to see the new bishop of the ward. And I can't remember exactly what we talked about. It may have been something along kind of law of chastity lines. And I came home and I was frustrated. And I remember saying to my dad, I just feel like the bishop's just sitting there judging me. And I feel uncomfortable with that dynamic. And my dad thought for a second and he looked at me and he said, well, in the scriptures, it says that the bishop is a judge in Israel. So actually, his job is to be a judge. And I thought, I guess so. And my dad, who I love and I admire and knew, thought was very strong in the church, having been a bishop, and we were back on really great terms at this point. And it was just this weird, it wasn't a reprimand. It was just a bit of a reframe. And I remember thinking, it's funny. I didn't know what about it sat funny, because if the scriptures say it, it must be true. And if my dad believes it, it must be true. But I couldn't shake that something just felt off. So I would say that's probably one of my first kind of shelf items as a kid.
So as you're thinking about, and go ahead and look at your outline if you want, as you're thinking about your Mormon story, assuming that you have many normal Mormon experiences that we've probably covered in other episodes with other people, what's the next part of your story that kind of like is really important to your development in terms of like how your faith journey ends up, if that makes sense?
Yeah, that's a great question. The next big thing that happened was I graduated high school and put in my mission papers. Sorry.
And we only have to talk about your mission if there's something really relevant to the later parts of your story.
And I would say there is. But one of the things, so that leader from the Teachers Quorum presidency, or from my time in Teachers Quorum presidency, who had that huge impact on me, right around the time I graduated from high school, he was diagnosed with cancer. Ooh. And he was a marathon runner. He was
healthy,
a very healthy, active guy. And he had like a wart or a bump or something on his foot that ended up being cancer. And I remember thinking, that's too bad, but he'll get through it. He's a healthy guy. He's a member of the church. Like, there's no reason this wouldn't go well. And the stake president at the time worked at the hospital. My mom worked at the hospital. And so the stake president gave him a blessing that said, you will live several more years. And he had a bunch of young boys at home. And he was kind of promised that he would be around. And he died less than a year later. And he died when I was in my first transfer on my mission. And I got that email. And what was really weird is the week before I got that news, I just felt like I should send him an email. And I remember sitting in a little library in the middle of Sweden somewhere, and I just wrote him an email, and I said, hey, Scott, we haven't talked in a while. I just wanted to say thank you for like all that you did for me as a kid. Like you really helped me get on my mission. You really helped motivate me to get my life in order to be here and to be serving the Lord. And then the next week I got the email that he had died. And I took that as the Spirit had communicated to me that I needed to reach out to him. And I never heard back from him directly, but I did hear from my parents who had talked to him that he got that email, and he was very moved. He was very touched. And I didn't know what to make of that. I didn't know what to make of the fact that I had planned on him being around, and I had planned on him being a continuing figure in my life for good and a really great example, and it was just ripped out.
And the stake president said he would.
And the stake president, it wasn't a bishop's blessing. It wasn't a home teacher's blessing. It was the stake president who gave this blessing. And again, that was probably the next big shelf item of how do you square that? Lord, it must be the Lord's will. And maybe the stake president.
That what?
That he had to die. The Lord needed him for work on the other side or whatever it was. And maybe the stake president.
Hey, by the way, when Mormons say work on the other side, tell our non-Mormons what that means. Because it's so interesting, right?
Yeah, work on the other side.
Other side of what?
The other side of the veil.
The other side of the veil.
That separates
So to
life and
non-Mormons,
death.
what's a veil?
Yeah, so long story short, plan of salvation is we existed.
Which is the plan of our existence.
Yeah, there's how life goes for us. There's the pre-existence, you live with God up in heaven, and then we're
As
here
a spirit,
on earth.
or as an
spirit.
intelligence or whatever.
You get a body, you come down to earth, and after you die, you go to spirit prison or spirit paradise, depending on whether you were more good or more bad in life, I think is probably the loose way to classify that. And so for someone like Scott, who passed away and was obviously going to paradise in that kind of holding period before you then go to one of the three kingdoms.
Yeah, the holding period before Judgment Day.
Yeah,
where you find that's where you're sent to your final reward.
Right. And so work on the other side was, Scott then got to preach to the people in prison who didn't have the chance to hear about the gospel on earth and were kind of stuck in limbo because they hadn't been baptized. They didn't have all the requisite things to make it to the celestial kingdom.
They weren't Mormon enough, basically.
Yeah, they weren't Mormon enough. And so Scott had the wonderful opportunity to teach those people in spirit prison.
Because he was Mormon enough.
And now that he was no longer on earth, he could do really a lot of good there.
And I think that's worth kind of just disentangling a little bit, because the function of that is like, we assume Scott, right? We assume Scott had a spouse. We assume Scott had kids. Mm-hmm. We assume Scott had loved ones, and Scott's dead. And that doesn't feel very good. Nope. So it feels a lot better to create a story about how to make that death noble. Because it can't be that God's mean, that God's a jerk, that God's neglectful, or that his plan is awful. So instead...
Or that the stake president got it wrong.
Right.
And
that can't be the story either.
Yeah.
God changed his mind and needed Scott on the other
must
side.
be...
I think it can't be that the priesthood doesn't actually have the power to heal, even though we're taught that it does.
Right.
It can't be that, or that the leaders make a mistake when they prophesy that he'll be healed and he doesn't. It can't be that the leaders make mistakes.
Right.
No, it's got to be that maybe the Lord did promise some years worth of time left, and then things changed and the Lord needed him sooner.
Carol, we need to make a book on how Mormons blame the most awful things on God. That's why
not even blame, but just attribute and somehow put a positive spin on.
No. Here, but let's deconstruct this because what they're saying is that Steve had a spouse that depended on him for income. Yeah. Steve had children that could have really benefited from having their dad around.
Scott.
Thank you, Scott. Scott had a spouse who needed him and loved him.
Yeah.
And by the way, Scott had a wife that was taught to stay home and not get an education or not a career, depending on Scott's livelihood, right?
Best for her to be a wife and mother in Zion and raise her children at home where women belong.
And then Scott has children. Scott was taught to have a lot of children, and they're going to be needing him. But God just really, really needed him. He couldn't wait until the millennium. God couldn't wait until the millennium to have all these spirits that are doing nothing on the other side teach those people in spirit prison. God needed to yank Scott. God needed to yank Scott out of that family to stick him in the spirit prison so he could teach stuff. Think about the implications for the spouse and the kids, and what type of God is that's making that choice of like, I'm just picturing like God with his counselors, his secretary up there, like, well, Scott's kids could have a dad in their formative years. Nah, let's go ahead and take him and have him teach in his fictitious spirit prison. Let's go ahead and take him and do that.
In my mind, like, well, they must have weighed the pros and cons, and the pros of taking Scott outweighed the cons. Yeah. That yes, it is sad that these sons will not have a dad in their formative years. That is tough. But everyone has their own struggles, and that maybe is just their struggle. But the pros of taking Scott outweighed those cons, and I had to believe that. I had to have faith that he was doing something more important than being here on earth.
Yeah, and on the one hand, it's what humans do. They try, and it's healthy to make meaning out of suffering, because if you don't make meaning out of suffering, then life is just awful. Right. So it's not pernicious, it's not dumb, it's not evil. It's literally what all humans do. Right. It's like there must have been a grand purpose, and that's how we feel better. On the other hand, like if you really think it through, it's just like the God of the lost keys. God's going to help some Utah Provo woman find her keys, but when the Nairobi little girl is about to be assaulted, God's kind of, well, that's not as important as helping the Provo woman find her keys. Sure. So it's not a very consistent ethical cosmology.
Right.
If I go back to my Mormon brain, it has a lot to do with the fall of Adam, the terrestrial state of our being here, and that we just need to work towards, Christ coming back one day, that God is sovereign over all, and all of the things that are wrong will be undone, and we will reign with Jesus forever, and all of our tears will be wiped from our eyes. And so we have to live in this state of being to be able to get the fullness of the gospel eventually. And every culture, every religion, everybody has a way of dealing with death. And for me, when I was Mormon, the way that I would have framed a close loved one's death for me with the Mormon, I do John, you're being a little cynical over there. So I was like, I feel like when I was Mormon,
is it cynical though?
I'm saying from my perspective, the cosmology, the theology around how I dealt with death as a Mormon was probably one of the best. And I can only speak for myself. So I'd like to hear other listeners about how they feel like that.
Well, let me just be clear. I don't think it's bad. I think it's what humans do. Yeah. And I actually think it's healthy to make meaning out of suffering. Yeah. If you study the psychology literature, people do better when they make meaning, when they create story around suffering so that the suffering has a purpose. So Kara, I'm not intending to be snarky or critical or cynical, just to be clear.
Right.
But people base their lives around these decisions. Right. So these stories seem totally innocuous and even helpful, and they are at a point, but we plan our whole lives around these types of stories. And it's these types of stories that bind us to the church such that we don't ever have a chance oftentimes. I go to these faith crisis workshops and retreats. I meet 60-year-olds that it's not till they're 60 or 70 where they have the first thought that maybe the church isn't true.
Right.
And you think about the other side of this conditioning is all I'm saying. Yeah. Some of these people are waking up in their 60s and 70s, realizing they had based their lives on something that wasn't what they thought. Yeah. And it's not that the church is evil. It's not that any of this is inherently bad. It's just that I'm just identifying the types of stories and conditionings that bind Orthodox Mormons in a high demand religion to a lifetime of servitude that has really serious implications. I mean, Carrie, you woke up at 31, right? Imagine waking up at 70. Yeah. And I'm just saying, all we're doing is we're not saying it's evil. We're just saying this is how it happens.
With this specific type of meaning and suffering that relates to a God, to this plan of salvation, to this structure, to the spirit prison and the people waiting there for their salvation that need to be taught by the people in spirit paradise, that subconsciously, if that is how you made meaning out of losing that leader, then that further buys you into that system. Because if you don't participate in that system, then maybe that's not how it works. And maybe that's not why Scott died. And then you lose that meaning. And then what's it all for anyway? It's just this house of cards, I think, is sort of what I'm picking up with John's whole thing is the more we make these stories to make suffering more meaningful, to make sense of our lives, which on their own aren't inherently bad, but when they're all weaved together within the structure of a religious context that has specific rules, specific beliefs, all of this, you just have to keep tightening and tightening and tightening that weave for it to all stay together. Because once you pull that one thread, well, then it all starts to unravel. So to me, that's sort of the subconscious takeaway there, that if that's the story that everyone had to tell themselves to make sense of this young man dying and leaving his, 5 boys and wife behind, and youth, like you, who relied on him and friends and family, well, then it's going to make you work harder on your mission so that you too can wind up in spirit paradise and be with Scott again and participate in that system where all of it is only within that system that there is meaning in Scott's death, right? Like theoretically. I think now, and we'll get there, but I think there's other ways to make meaning out of that. But when you're making a Mormon meaning in a Mormon context of a Mormon experience, it strengthens the entire Mormon house of cards and further ingratiates you into the cogs of the Mormon machine.
And I doubled down.
Yeah.
I doubled down on my mission. My first transfer was really hard, and I had a trainer who tried his best and was just dealing with his own stuff. But it was pretty rough. And getting that email it kind of snapped me out of the woe is me mentality of being on a mission. I was in Sweden. This was 2006. And I didn't know the language very well, and it was humid and it was bright. It was the middle of the summer, and the sun wasn't setting until like 10 p.m. And I was so out of my element that the only thing I could go back to was that same rock and foundation that I had as a kid, which was the church.
Yeah.
And the fact that I was on a mission just made it that much easier to dive in and double down.
And on the one hand, I want to apologize to some viewers and listeners. Sometimes they just want us to shut up and just let the people tell their stories. And I get that. I want that too. But I also think it's important for there to be some analysis.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah, you got to bring it home.
And so for those who don't like that analysis, I apologize. Sorry, not sorry in a way, because I think we're talking about really important things here. Right. And the other thing I just want to say is we talk a lot about the church's business model being sexual-based and shame-based. And that's why we ask the law of chastity question in every episode. What we've never talked about, Kara, the church has to own death.
Oh, yeah.
Because like sexuality, owning the messaging around death is the church owns funerals. You don't do funerals outside of Mormonism. Right. Mormons own your funeral. The bishop and the stake president
presides.
The ward owns your funeral. Why? Because if you can get people to think about, as soon as death happens, you're like, holy crap, somebody died. I might die soon. That's an opportunity.
Crisis.
No, that's an opportunity for the church, because you're going to be sad. And normally you might grieve for Scott.
Yep.
But Mormons are the worst grievers ever at death, because immediately if you've got a loved one die, what are the ward members coming up to you saying?
don't be sad. You'll see him again.
Yeah, you'll see him again.
Crying is a sign of like lack of belief.
Exactly, Kara.
Right.
Yeah. If you're sad at a Mormon death, then you don't have enough faith.
You don't understand the plan of salvation,
Right.
obviously.
Is that true?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the other thing
I've
is,
honestly never thought about it that way, but it's so true. And I remember reading, and this is just a little flash forward, but I remember reading, there's a talk by, I believe, Boyd K. Packer that is about funerals. And he lays out, I think it was at like a devotional or a training or something. Maybe it was even a general conference talk, but he lays out how the talk teaches from a church leader at the pulpit that funerals are not for the family to grieve. That's not what they're for. It is a time to reinforce church teachings. It's a time to teach people and preach about the gospel.
Talk about the plan of salvation.
To solidify anyone who might be there who isn't, very faithful, who might be on the fence or who is a non-member, can learn the principles of the gospel and how that can comfort them in this time. And it literally says funerals are not for the family. And I'm sorry, can we just previously rewind and reference this man who left behind a wife and kids and extended family and a whole community? But it's not for them. No, this is a missionary opportunity. Excuse me?
and psychologically, any mental health professional will tell you want to lean into your grief. You don't want to suppress it and avoid it and ignore it. And so it leaves a lot of Mormons with just unprocessed everything, unprocessed trauma, unprocessed grief. And that leads to lots of self-medication and problems later. And so in this case, by the Mormon Church owning the narrative around Scott's death, what it led to is your doubled down commitment in Mormonism. So it's another form. It's not pernicious. It's not intentional. Right. It's giving everybody a narrative that makes them feel better, at least in the short term. Yeah. But it also serves the purpose of binding people's allegiance more and more and more to the church.
It is that both scenario. It is both.
Yeah.
And that's always hard to square. It is. No question. Yeah. But no, you're absolutely right.
Were you going to say something, Kara?
No, but it just reminded me of Margie's episode last week talking about mothering and things, and anything that gives you anxiety in life as a human being, things that are natural, that gives you anxiety. You have questions about where did we come from? Where are we going? The two biggest questions. Right. And about death. Naturally humans feel anxiety, and that, religion wants to provide an answer. Again, it's not necessarily pernicious, but it does bind you. And it just reminds me of Margie's interview about feeling a lot of anxiety about providing the means to which your kids can obtain salvation, and just all of the things that are natural to human life, like bringing a new life into the world, and how much anxiety that is, or a life going away. And the church, again, not pernicious in a way, but providing an answer that only works until it doesn't anymore. Right. Is what so many Mormon Stories interviews.
Context of itself.
Yep.
And again, like you've said, for a lot of people, it is so helpful to have that framework.
Like you said, no structure is the worst thing for kids.
Yeah, without that framework, you could get to some really dark places.
Yeah.
And so it does serve a purpose.
Yeah. Yeah. And just make no mistake, high demand religions own birth. They own rites of passage in childhood and adolescence. They own marriage. Yep. And they own death. Yep. Right?
And sex.
And sex.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And everything in between.
Well, he didn't have to specify sex care because that's only supposed to happen within the confines of the marriage that he did specify. So I think it was implied.
Some people don't get married because their marriage is not legally recognized by the church. So this is a fight.
That was like hashtag sarcasm.
All right. Well, thanks for listeners, viewers, and you guys. Thanks for letting us deconstruct a little bit.
No, and I appreciate it because
this isn't premeditated, but I'm just we're riffing. This is like jazz.
And
this is like Mormon jazz.
And it's interesting. It's interesting to pick apart kind of death, because I had some influential people. I had a drama teacher pass away.
Oh yeah.
Right after I graduated high school, and that was hard, but so death was kind of a common theme for me around 18, 19, 20. Yeah. And I just had a hard time. I had a hard time with that, but I doubled down on my mission. My second transfer, a little bit of scrupulosity comes in here. My second transfer, my companion and I lived in an apartment building next door to two girls who were about our same age, and they cut hair, and we needed haircuts. And so my companion said, hey, why don't we just invite these girls over? They can give us haircuts, and then we could teach them a lesson. And I was like, I think according to my white handbook in this pocket, like, I think according to the handbook, I'm not supposed to do that because that's 2 girls, that's 2 boys. Like, we should have a chaperone of some kind. And my companion kind of said, it's just a haircut. Like, it's fine. We'll leave the front door open or something. And and at one point, I found myself in a separate room teaching one of the girls while he was getting his haircut in the kitchen. And I remember thinking, like, my heart was racing. Yeah. I did not know what to do in that situation. And I just kind of shut down. And I stopped talking and I stopped kind of interacting. And my companion saw that I was being really, really weird and eventually ushered the girls out. And I called my zone leader that night and I said, we did something bad. And I think I need to talk to the mission president about this. And he said, yeah, no, you probably should. That's like a clear violation of mission rules. You should talk to the mission president. So I called the mission president in tears, like, I am so sorry. I'm a new missionary. I cannot believe I let this happen. I know I'm only the junior companion. But there is no reason for me to have let this happen. As a missionary, I needed to follow the rules.
Were you like 18?
19, yeah. Because the closer you hold to the rule, I had so many members in my home ward before I left say, like, the more obedient you are, the more success you'll have.
And the hotter wife you'll end up with. And I'm not joking. That is taught.
Absolutely. The better you do on your mission.
So you must have been a great missionary. You must have been a super obedient missionary.
Get it.
I was.
Stop you.
You better believe it. But I absolutely was. I took that to heart. Even in the MTC, like, I was straight arrow. I was doing everything by the book. And that's why this experience of not doing something by the book really just hit me hard. And it hit me even harder that I was the junior companion. Had I been the senior companion, it would have been a lot easier to say, no, we're not doing that. Yeah. But I felt like I needed to defer a little bit to the senior companion, which I realized was not the right thing to do in that situation, because I had someone who was patriarchally over me, right? Who was... Because the senior companion should be able to, they're in charge. They should be able, as a bishop gets revelation for a ward, a senior companion should get revelation for the companionship.
But nothing happened.
Nothing happened.
Okay.
No, it was.
You're just saying you were scrupulous.
Absolutely innocent. But I called the mission president to confess that we had girls in the apartment. Yeah. Nothing happened. Yeah. But that alone just ate at my conscience. Sure. And my mission president, I'm sure he just laughed and kind of went, if you only heard, if you only heard what other missionaries had been doing.
What he said is, I like this elder because he's like really trying to obey the rules.
And the next transfer, I end up as a secretary in the mission home.
Totally, I called it.
And that started what I think was...
How to get promoted on your mission. Confess something ridiculously benign.
Yeah, pick something
Become
real
assistant
small
to the president.
You can't get set home for, but that makes you look really good.
That's literally probably will work.
Yeah.
Honestly,
we just found a secret.
Because
TikTok.
Because what you're
how to become AP on your mission.
Right.
What you're trying to say is when you become AP, not only do you have like this like status, right? Mm-hmm. I've never served a mission, so like
it's
only from what I've
assistant
heard.
to the president.
But you're also indoors instead of outdoors, and it's a little more cushy. You get to travel.
Right. Oh yeah, you get a car. You get status. You don't have to tract all day. All the missionaries look up to you. You get to drive around and have fun. Like I imagine being an AP is a lot of fun.
It was, and I mean, I subconsciously or not, I felt like I needed to confess that to the mission president. It was in no way meant to be a way to climb the leadership ladder in the mission.
Of course, at least consciously.
Yeah, exactly. So I end up in the mission home, and I got along so well with my mission president and his wife, the loveliest people.
They're
to
wonderful.
This day, I just love them so much.
They still comment on both of our Instagram. I mean, they're just really involved, very nice, wonderful
just
people.
The nicest people.
Is this going to change after this interview comes out?
No,
honestly, no. I don't think so.
Well, you never know.
Yep. You never know. But honestly, if the Carlsons hear this, they know how much I love them, and they know how much I loved my mission.
What's his first name?
Janoke.
Okay.
Janoke Carlson.
There's some Swedish.
Yeah, so he was Swedish, she was Norwegian. They spoke a weird kind of mix of both, which made it hard as a Swedish missionary to get a handle on the language. Yeah. But Sister Carlson was really into music. She, did piano, and I was musical, and I was always looking for ways to kind of express musically my testimony. And she helped find opportunities for me to do that. There was a guitar in the mission home. There was a piano in the mission home. We set up firesides locally in Stockholm for members to come to. And I had a really great time in the office, and then I left for a single 2-month transfer, and then I came right back in the office as assistant to the president.
So for the sake of time, we just want to make sure, is there anything when I think of Sweden, I think of Hans and Birgitta Maddsen, the area authority president who was Swedish, who in the mid 2000s started losing his faith. And then it became a New York Times story. Right. And we've had him on Mormon Stories. He's one of our favorite interviewees. Were you there during that time, after that time, before that time? Did you even hear of the Maddsens? And just for the sake of time, is there anything else about your mission that was really important to your story as it culminates?
I did run into Hans Maddsen in Stockholm. We compared notes, and we would have crossed paths at a zone conference once.
But nothing notable to your mission.
Nothing notable to the
story,
mission.
Your story.
Yeah, to my story.
Okay.
I did actually spend some time with his brother, who was the stake president in Gothenburg at the time.
Which brother?
Leif.
Yeah. His twin?
Twin brother.
Yeah, his twin brother. And super great guy.
Yeah.
One of my favorite memories actually is driving around Sweden on Midsummer. It had rained all day, and in Sweden, Midsummer is a big holiday. You're doing the maypole, you're doing all this stuff. We couldn't do that because it was raining, and he felt bad because it was my only Midsummer in Sweden, and so he threw us in a car and drove us around Gothenburg as we listened to the Beatles.
Ooh, that's edgy.
It was. I remember thinking this is a little edgy, and I don't know how I feel about this. But again, he was the stake president in Gothenburg at the time, and I thought if he's doing this,
it must be okay.
It must be okay.
I mean, because priesthood trumps everything, right?
Yep, priesthood trumps everything, and
patriarchy wins.
It was one of those little moments. I mean, to this day, I appreciate that moment so much. It was such a little thing. Yeah. For him to go out of his way to make us missionaries feel special, but it was really impactful for me.
As just a side note, it's this kind of a sad story that Hans and Leif were twins, so close, so faithful, kind of like two major pillars in the Latter-day Saint tradition in Sweden. One brother loses his faith, the other doesn't, and how that drives a huge wedge between two twin brothers. It's a super sad story. I don't know how it is right now. Maybe they're on good terms now, but over the years that has made me sad.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's been rocky. Yeah, they both served in England. They were companions at one point on their missions. Yeah. The whole thing in Sweden was the second harvest. Yeah. That there had been a first harvest in kind of the 1800s. I had ancestors who were part of that harvest who joined the church in the 1800s and then eventually made their way to Idaho.
That was just as a side note, I remember you've said special for you that you got to see where your ancestors were from, and see their homes and things.
Yeah, at one point I was doing my mom sent me some family history stuff, and I asked the branch president where I was, do you know where this place is? I had no idea where it was in the entire country of Sweden, which is about the size of California. And I just, out of the blue, I said, do you know where this is? And he goes, yeah, it's 20 minutes down the road. That's in your area. Yeah. Do you want to go? And he and his wife took me and my companion around. We knocked on some doors. We talked to some people. We took some photos. We saw some churches where my ancestors did stuff in Sweden. But that was the first harvest. And the second harvest, I can't remember which general authority told the Maddsen brothers on their mission that there will be a second harvest. There will be another big wave of church activity in Sweden. And so when I was on my mission, 2006 to 2008, they were still harping on the second harvest. Yeah. And to this day, it has not happened. The mission itself was not successful as far as numbers go. With a mission of 100 people, we had goals for 60 baptisms in a year. I never baptized a single person my entire mission.
And to give people perspective, on my mission in Guatemala, we were baptizing 700, 750 a month.
A month?
There were companionships with over 40 baptisms in a month. I baptized 120 people on my mission, and I wasn't on the low end, but I also wasn't doing the crazy stuff. So that's just to kind of compare numbers a little bit.
And then the last thing that kind of contributes to my story that happened on the mission.
Oh wait, can I say one more thing? Yeah. That second harvest idea is a big deal because it was prophesied for years by prophets, seers, and revelators. And I don't think it's just Sweden. I think other European countries often had similar kind of promises. Really, what happened was there was this epic of kind of American exceptionalism, let's just say post-World War II, where these European countries are all beat up by the war, but America's super strong. IBM sort of corporate mentality. Donnie and Marie come on board. America sweeps the world with its power and influence. And Europe gets swept up in Americanism, American exceptionalism. And with Donnie and Marie and Go America and whatever, baseball, basketball, professional sports, there's this huge increase in conversions. But then at some point, that falls out of fashion and Europe starts getting more secular. Right. And so this idea of a second harvest would be, where are the good old days? Like we know when the good old days were. Yep. Are they ever coming back, or is it just all downhill from here? And so the prophets, seers, and revelators have to prophesy for a second harvest, or else it's just literally you're on the tail end of a downslide.
Yeah, you lose so much hope. Looking at those numbers, looking at when I was AP and getting the reports of all the numbers from the zones, those numbers were not trending well at all. Yeah.
Oh, the church was slowly dying. It has been. That's what Mormon Civil War is with Lynn, Kara, help me out. Lynn, he was excommunicated. My friend Lynn, Mormon Civil War. It's just about the decline of the Mormon church in the UK. All of Western Europe, the church is dying. Right. Absolutely. And it would be this promise of a second harvest that's like keeping the fish on the hook.
Interested enough.
So that the members don't feel like they're just fighting for a dying cause. Right.
And for the missionaries, it has that effect of, we must not be doing things right. If the second harvest is not actively happening, even though that prophecy has been in effect for years, if the second harvest is not happening during those 2 years that I am on my mission, what am I not doing right?
Right. Sorry, it's Peter Bleakley. It's not Lynn, it's Peter. Okay, keep going.
Yeah, it's like that promise of being the chosen generation. Like we were raised being told we're the chosen generation, and then you start to talk about it, and you realize that they were being the youth in the 80s were being taught they're the chosen generation. Yeah. Youth in the 70s were being taught they're the chosen generation.
Yeah, back to the 1800s.
So who's the chosen generation that's actually going to usher in Christ?
The answer is whatever the current generation is the chosen generation.
Right, exactly. and it is that's I think a really smart way to keep people, like you said, on the hook, to keep them engaged, and it worked. It worked for me.
Malicious or not?
Like not malicious.
It's not malicious.
No, it is not malicious.
Intent.
It's optimism.
It's yes.
Yeah.
Hyper optimism.
It's optimism
and hope.
But let's be clear. Western Europe, the Mormon church in Western Europe is dying. It's not just like flatlined. It is in steep decline, shrinking, collapsing wards, collapsing stakes, closing missions, selling off buildings. The Mormon church is in free fall in Western Europe. And I'm not saying I'm giddy about it. Like, it's kind of sad. Right. But that's what kind of like the resurgence of the British invasion, we call it, the Brit Vengers. There are all these ex-Mormon YouTubers and podcasters now that are doing amazing work, whether it's Nemo the Mormon, Peter Bleakley with Mormon Civil War, Latter Day, what is it? Oh my gosh, I always forget the two women that do Latter Day. Help me out, Carrie. You have to Google that.
Latter Day Lesbians podcast?
No, it's two British. It's a Scottish woman and a British Mormon women that do.
Oh, I don't know those names very well.
Look it up if you can. And then of course, Priesthood Dispatches. But there's just this amazing, and I think they're trying to spread it through Europe and have like a German or a Swedish Mormon Stories in effect across all these countries. Anyway, we're way off track.
Which is interesting because there were never any rumblings on my mission of anything about the Swedish rescue that would then happen in 2012, 4 years after I left my mission, or rumblings of any. There really was not much other than second harvest. Let's work hard. Mm-hmm. Let's make this happen.
It's 21st Century Saints is the name of the YouTube channel. I just want to give them a shout out whenever I can.
Great. Okay. And I think, is there something to be said for the ideas around happiness in those, certain European countries, and like the juxtaposition between the happiness index, that the rates of like secularness in countries.
Like, why is John's mission in Guatemala baptizing 700 a month, and you didn't even get to baptize one?
Right.
What's the difference there?
You know what the difference is? It's poverty and lack of education.
That's exactly what Sweden, his observation was.
Sweden as a socialist country did very well. I saw very few homeless people my entire mission all across the country. And everyone's needs are taken care of. They get schooling, they get health care. All of their needs are taken care of for the most part. And so when we would approach people on the street and say, do you ever feel like you're missing something in life? They would just flat out say, no. Like, I'm very happy with my life.
Yeah.
And Scandinavia culturally has like very close families.
Very close families.
Like things close at like 5 p.m. because everybody goes home to be with their family and have dinner.
And it's dark in the winter.
And it's dark in the winter. But still, but that keeps people inside and close together and spending time together. You don't need the church to tell you to spend time with your family.
Yeah, we were offering medicine for an ailment that did not exist.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
really
that's the most interesting thing about people who serve in those countries, and recognizing that things that bring a lot of meaning, if people already have that meaning and they find fulfillment in ways outside of that, like they're really not looking for a lot else. And yeah, just like Spencer, you're like, an ailment that doesn't really exist. Right. But yeah, I think there's something to be said for like the happiest countries or some of the least religious, and like religiosity, the more religious a country is, sometimes the higher the crime, the higher rates of like horrible things like, certain types of genital mutilation or wars or just things that are really poverty, things that are some of the worst atrocities imaginable, because the more religious, the more fundamental people get, the more double down in their ideas, and they're not able to, live in a secular society with different ideas.
To me, this is all connected even to what we were talking about before, because what you're getting at is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Yeah. When you have food, when you have shelter, when you have love, when you have community, when you have education, when you have a good life, you are able to reference previous discussion about when you lost your leader, Scott. You are able to make your own meaning out of what suffering does come up in your life, which is fewer and far between. You have a nice, comfortable home to go to and a full belly to sit on your sofa and ponder the death of your friend and make meaning out of your suffering. You don't need an institution. You don't need a religious structure. You don't need somebody else telling you what the meaning is to be made out of your suffering situation. Right. So do you ever feel like you're missing something in your life? And these people are like, no, I'm good.
We're doing great. It
doesn't add any more cards to that little house of cards. Yeah. When something bad happens, they can make their own meaning out of it. It gives them a totally different context that they don't need to start building up a different one to contextualize their life.
Yeah.
That's so good that you said that. And it also just it reminds me of the way that I internalized what you said. Because Spencer, I remember early on when you and Lizzy were first married, and I remember asking you how your mission was in Sweden. And I remember having this conversation years ago, and I internalized it as like, well, that's why socialism is so wrong.
Right.
That's why they're so happy, but they think they're happy.
Yeah, they don't know
they're
true
not.
happiness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and like I didn't understand. I think once you're really confronted with the data that like literally the more religious a country is, the worse off people often are. I don't want to make so many like strong statements, but really that's the data that I've had to confront.
Yeah, and there's another way to say it. The more educated and prosperous a country becomes, the less interested they are in organized religion of any type.
Right.
And that's why the church excels in Philippines, Latin America, and Africa. That's where the Mormon church grows gangbusters. Right. In terms of statistical baptisms, of course, attrition rates and retention rates are abysmal.
Right.
But the more educated and healthy someone becomes, the less they have a need for the Mormon church.
And I think interesting, I just want to acknowledge the flip side of that coin, which is to say, it's not necessarily a bad thing.
No.
In a less organized community, perhaps, or people with fewer resources, joining a church community where you're maybe pooling resources, you're pooling that leadership, giving the youth that structure, it provides some tools and some structure that can be really, really useful to someone who didn't have that before.
Yeah.
But when you are, again, in a more prosperous country where structure and tools of other kinds already exist, you don't need the structure and tools that the church has to offer, because you have structure and tools of a different kind.
A way to think about this is if you were ex-Mormon Thanos and you could snap and make something disappear, would you make the Mormon church disappear in developing countries? If you were Mormon Thanos, and if I cared about the people, I can't say that I would snap the Mormon church away in Latin America or the Philippines or Africa, because like we started with today, some structure is often better than none.
And as we said, when it works well, it works so well, especially on that local homegrown community level. neighbors helping neighbors, people helping people, that's not a bad thing.
No, it's not. And that's why when people say that we hate the church, we're trying to take the church down. We're not. We are not. I acknowledge that the church helps many people.
Yes.
Absolutely does.
Yeah, it's really an arrogant thing. And even in Guatemala, you're a missionary, you go up to a Catholic and it's like, hey, we've got the one true church. You want to, and they're like, I'm happy in my church. I believe in my church. And, as a
And my
missionary,
family's been a part of this church for generations and generations and generations.
And as a missionary, you walk away, it's like losers.
Right.
Like, they're totally lost and blind. And I mean, it's just so condescending. The Mormon missionary program is very well intended, but at its core, it's culturally imperialistic in non-U.S. countries. And it's so insulting. It means we have the truth. You don't. I'm a 19-year-old kid that barely knows how to wipe himself. I've never been married, let alone had kids.
Right.
I've never lived in your country, but I'm going to tell you what you need to be happy and healthy. And if you don't agree, when I'm knocking at your door the first time we ever meet, then I'm going to kind of laugh and snicker at you when I'm walking away with my companion. It's not that they're evil kids. It's just naivete, right?
For the people listening who've never been raised in the church, the missionaries don't know that they're doing that. They don't know that that's wrong. They don't know that it is, culturally offensive. Like again, when you're raised in this, when your reality is that you know the truth that could save the world and give salvation to everyone, you really think that's necessary and good. And you are sad when someone doesn't listen to your message of Jesus, because
what if that was their one chance?
And as we've explained, if they die, they're going to spirit prison and they're going to have to learn it there instead. And that's going to be harder. And they're going to miss out on all the blessings in their life that they could have had if they just would have listened to this message. It's really not, and I'm not saying this, I'm not saying it's justified, but I'm just saying that unless you've grown up with it and lived it, it's really hard to understand that you truly don't see the issue with it when you're in it. When you're born and raised and you go on that mission, you're going to save the world. Yeah. You really think you're doing the right thing.
You're doing God's work.
Oh, for sure.
And how could that be bad? Work. And I understand that's going to be really lost on people, really hard to understand. But these kids, this is why I have a really hard time when people who are not members of the church or previous members of the church want to really like mess up with the mission. Oh, I see the missionaries walking down my street. Like, what can I say to really mess with them? It breaks my heart because
it's unkind.
It's not kind, and they're doing the best they can. They really think this is the best way they could be spending their time. Yeah. And the best thing you could do is show them love, because what better lesson to teach them that the most loving people, or that rather there are just simply loving people everywhere, because they don't know. They really don't know.
They don't know.
And for me, hearing someone say, "No, I'm good," and actually meaning it. I think that was the first time that I had really talked to someone who was not a member of the church. And I was able to explain, like, we would teach people the lessons. We would have them read the Book of Mormon. We would do all of that stuff. And at the end of all of that, they would still say, I appreciate the time you've taken. It's just not for me. I'm not interested. None of this appeals to me. And I couldn't wrap my head around, what? Yeah. But this is the truth. So
why is it not resonating with you?
Why is it not resonating? Like, what do you have that I don't have?
Yeah.
And why isn't the Lord filling in the gaps for them?
And exactly.
Helping them understand
where is
and
the
feel
spirit?
the Spirit?
Am I doing something wrong? Oh no. Did I think about that girlfriend? Oh no. Did I screw up this person's eternal salvation because? And then you get into the scrupulosity. But I mean, overall, my mission was great. The weirdest thing I would say happened was while I was AP, a missionary was excommunicated and sent home for having sex with a member in Sweden. He then returned about a week or two later and married her. Whoa. And was living in Sweden. And my last area was a branch of probably 10 people. And he and his wife were like two of the less active members that we would go have dinner with on Sundays.
You were like in the MTC with this guy.
And I was in the MTC with this guy. Yeah. Wonderful, wonderful guy. And watching his struggle, I remember as AP, we had to go, like we went to pick him up, or we picked him up from the train station or something. And I remember he left the mission home to get on a plane home, and we were left with his bag of garments. And we didn't know what to do. It's like, well, do we throw them away? Do we need to dispose of them? properly. Like, what do we do with these garments? And I remember emailing my dad, like, this is the weirdest thing for me. Because I felt like this poor guy had just thrown away his life, right? He had just screwed it up. And now he had to go through the lessons and get rebaptized someday and go through that whole process. What a hard thing that must be. But that kind of shook me too. So that brought some stark reality into a dumb little 21-year-old's reality at the time.
The magnetism of Swedish women, though. Could any of us deny?
When I was growing up, there was literally a beer commercial that had as actresses in the commercial, it was a Swedish bikini team.
Oh gosh.
And it would be like a Budweiser commercial.
This is a core memory for John.
I know, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and it would just be like blonde, tall women in bikinis as a marketing tool to sell beer. Your Swedish bikini team.
Absolutely. I mean, the joke was always that, if you were a missionary and you fell in love with a Swedish girl, they would move to the States with you for a while, but you would then get sucked back to Sweden. And we met a lot of members where the wife was Swedish, the husband was American, and they had done just that trajectory to the States for a little bit and then back to Sweden kind of for the rest of their life.
But the truth is, this happens in every mission. In my mission, there was missionaries that had sex with, we're really drilling on your episode deep, and
that's fine.
But isn't it a weird contrast between, like, on my mission, I'm like, I can't read the newspaper because that's breaking the rules. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, my companionship can go to the bathroom, but other than that, he can't ever leave my sight. Yeah. That's how my brain was working constantly for 2 years. Oh, I can't call mom because it's either Mother's Day or Christmas. I want to talk to mom, but I can't break the rules. So I'll just tough it out. Yep. I've got diarrhea for 2 months straight and I'm probably not healthy, but I got to go tracked because you got to work for 12 hours a day, period. Like so there's like that level of obedience and seriousness.
Totally.
And then you've got a companion that like has sex with a woman on the bathroom floor of the church and then leaves the mission while he's a missionary. And the elders are like, what just happened? You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Or another companion, like another guy dies on his mission or another AP runs over somebody. And it's just this weird contrast of like hyper religiosity and then like extreme sin or misbehavior.
Made worse by the fact that you're a missionary and should know better.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That
should be following the
whatever
spirit.
sin you sin on your mission is going to be 10 times worse merely by the fact that you're currently on your mission.
You've been set apart.
Because you are someone special now doing the Lord's work.
Yeah, in Mormonism, you have the Melchizedek priesthood. Yep. That means you're going to be excommunicated. Automatically, guaranteed excommunication. Come home, shame with everyone in your ward and your parents, your siblings, grandparents.
Everyone's
the walk of shame for probably the rest of your life. You'll never get over it.
Right.
It's like the stakes are just so intense that I'm guessing the level of intensity of trying to be exactly obedience sometimes causes people to snap, to go way too far in the other direction. I imagine.
Absolutely.
And then I just want to add as a little cherry on top of this, the way that, John, you approach your mission, the way that Spencer approached his mission. And here we are 10, 15 years later and like, it's fine if you call your mom every week now.
Yeah.
No explanation.
Yeah, every week.
Now, because missionaries now it's like you said, it used to be Christmas and Mother's Day. That's the only time you get to talk to your family.
Oh, not just
other than
that.
Letters.
Not just that. So within like a couple weeks time period, 2 of my grandparents died. Okay. And my parents can't call me.
Yep. You don't know.
And letters take weeks to get from the U.S. to a developing country. So I'm in, this is a TikTok. So I'm in my monthly zone interview with my mission president. And he's just like, how's the area? How are your baptisms? Blah, blah, blah. And he was like, oh, Elder Dylan, your grandma died, and I'm so sorry. Were you close to her? And I'm just like, oh no, I'm processing it. And then he literally goes, oh my gosh, I forgot to tell you, your grandpa died too.
As like an afterthought.
What?
But I mean,
But yeah, this is back when you were on your mission.
Yeah.
That's how that news came across.
Yeah.
And now, like I remember us reading this church update with that again had no apology for how it used to be, no explanation for why it's changing. But now all of a sudden, kids can talk to their families every week on missions. It's fine now.
And it's literally
and it makes you question, like, well, then what the heck did you have to go through what you went through for? Why did you have to learn about your grandparents' death that way? If now it's fine.
and you know what it was? It was literally podcasts that shamed the church as being so cult-like that forced, during the Romney era, that forced the church to like go, we got to stop looking so culty. What are our most cultish
Cutting off
things?
contact.
And one of the most cultish things about Mormonism historically has been the missionary program.
Right.
And they've
I thought
tried
it was
to
more just because so many
decultify it.
people were coming home and their mental
That-
health
that
was so
too.
bad.
That too.
That too. It's all woven together.
Yeah, it's all
but
together.
literally to this day, a loved one dies, missionaries are taught not to go home for the funeral.
Right.
Yeah.
And they're told if you go home, we may not let you back.
Reference previous comment about how Mormons are terrible with grief.
Yeah.
That it shouldn't be a big deal because, well, you'll see your grandma
Have
again
faith.
in
It'll
heaven
make you
anyway.
stronger. The Lord will bless you if you don't go home for the funeral.
Exactly. Exactly.
So
So overall, the mission was great, and I learned
you got
so
good
much.
real world skills.
I got I got some good real world skills in the office. I had a great time. Grew a lot as a person, and am still to this day so grateful for those years in Sweden.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Loved it.
And you're
Yeah.
still close with some of your old
Oh
companions.
yeah,
and-
I still talk with companions. Some are in the church, some are not. Just lifelong friendships.
What you just illustrated, and I think what our talk just illustrated, is a truth within Mormon culture that the leaders will only admit when the camera's off. And that's that Mormon missions are primarily for the missionaries and for the church.
Absolutely.
They're not for the proselyting, and the conversions are like a bonus, but only a small fraction of those people ever remain in the church because, let's face it, once they learn what the church is really about, it's not always compelling. But the Mormon Church Missionary Program is a way to seal the church's young men and young women now to the church. Yeah. It's a mechanism of
devotion,
undue or high influence to lock members in.
Yep.
And training for future leaders.
Yeah.
I mean, that's my mission president. I remember saying, like, you'll probably head home, and within 10 years, if you're not called as bishop, like, I'll be surprised. Or 10 or 15 years. Yeah. And because this is a training ground for your future service in the church.
And if I'm Mormon Thanos, ex-Mormon Thanos, and like I'm given the option, all right, John, you can snap your fingers and you never served a mission, I would not snap my fingers.
No, absolutely not.
Even though I gave 2 years of my life to something that wasn't true, I learned a language. I learned how to do, I lived in a foreign country. I learned to do hard things. I had all these responsibilities, all these I had hard memories. I had traumatic memories, but ex-Mormon John Thanos, or Voldemort, you could just say Voldemort, would not snap away his own Mormon mission.
I don't believe you. I don't believe you. I think that if you looked at the 150 people that you baptized and you were able to say, okay, let's say 5 of them.
It was 120.
120. Oh, I exaggerated for you. Let's say 5 of them are still active in the church. And let's say that you could equate, or you could actually look at and calculate how many tools of undue influence were prohibiting them from living their best life. You're able to accurately look at the people that you interacted with that changed their life. I don't know if you'd say their life was changed necessarily for the better or for the worse. You have to have that data to know what you would do, right?
Well, I mean, yes and no. Like
You have to have it in context, I think.
I would have to know. I would have to know the data, but as you were probably paying attention to earlier, I believe that, well, first of all, I guarantee you 95% of the people that we baptized are no longer active. You go to the rolls of Guatemala and Chile, countries like that, the activity rates are literally less than 10%. Yeah. So, I mean,
right.
90% it's guaranteed 90% of my baptisms are no longer in the church. But let's just say for the 10 that are, I still believe that many of them are probably better off than they would have been if they had never joined the church.
And see,
so I'm not one of those that like feels tormented that I brought people into the church. Yeah. I think probably in Guatemala it helped a lot of people. What do you think about that, Carabaro?
What if they were living on like $5 a day or $1 a day and they had to give 10% of that to a $1 trillion corporation?
Okay, if you want to go there, I'll go there. Like what the Mormon, what religion often does is it says, hey, like we're totally hijacking. We have Spencer. We have destroyed. We have hijacked and destroyed your story.
This is what this is.
And this is why they call it a rabbit hole, because you can't just look at a mission in context of what it affected you. We have like this, like, I don't know what it is, string theory or physics of time travel and like the impact of like, if you take John DeLynn out of the story thread of 1120 people's lives, like how would the ripples have been different? I don't know.
Yeah.
We got George Bailey.
Would you go back in time and kill baby Hitler? Would you go back in time?
Right.
No. I'll just tell you my answer. I'll tell you my sincere answer. And this is with a limited view as a Mormon missionary. But what I saw is a lot of Guatemalan men would have mistresses. They would have a family in one town, and then where they would go off to work, they would literally have a second wife or a second partner and have kids with that. And so they would be traveling back and forth, trying to support two families on the income of like a coffee bean picker. And then when they got home from picking coffee beans, they weren't holding family home evening with their two separate families. They were going to the bar and getting drunk and being not a good dad. Sure. So what I saw, the influence of the Mormon church was like one family, no mistresses.
Give them a structure,
and when you got home, you're not going to the bar.
Right.
You're going to church and you're becoming a priesthood holder and you're learning to become a good dad, a good husband, a responsible, honest human. And guess what that did to their income? That increased their income. So it wasn't that they were just super poor, giving their remaining tennis shoe money to the church or food money. No, it was that, and also through the social networks of other educated, wealthy Guatemalan Mormons, they were getting better jobs. Their kids were getting better educations. And we were literally lifting them out of poverty into higher levels of a socioeconomic status. And maybe they would even end up at BYU, marry some white, Guatemalan boy or girl, and end up raising a multi-generational family here in the United States, really lifting, and then sending money back to lift up their generations back at home. So, Kara, what do you think?
This is the most pro-Mormon podcast on Apple, on iTunes.
It's good it's good, right?
Yeah.
We want to do this, right?
Yeah. You're describing all of the things like Spencer's stories growing up, this kind of stuff, of the things that you're reminding me, the good things that I loved about Mormonism. Yeah. But I've got to play devil's advocate because people are going to be like,
it's good.
John DeLynn, no more Voldemort.
We do. I have never hated the Mormon church. If I hated the Mormon church, I would not still be podcasting.
Right.
I'm grateful for the Mormon church. I love the Mormon church. I think it does a lot of good. We just want to stop the bad. We want to decrease the bad and help people who leave it because it's unfortunately not quite true.
And let's have an open invite that if you are from Guatemala and that situation John's talking about, why don't we get somebody from Guatemala who's a member of the church to come on the podcast?
Or Mexico or Honduras or El Salvador or Chile or Philippines or Africa.
But I would love for somebody to talk about the culture.
Mission areas.
Yeah, I would love for somebody to talk about the culture that John just explained, because I know that's also like pervasive in Mexico as well. And
it's machismo culture.
Yeah.
Which I don't mean a stereotype, but it was a thing when I was there.
Sure. Yeah. And my husband had a similar experience. He was in Indiana, Spanish speaking, and a lot of people who were bussed up there to work at factories, and they had one family in Indiana and another family that they would spend and send their money back to. And he converted, a handful of people who, they had to cut things off with their mistress, and he felt good about that. But then also he felt like he was also breaking up some families who were like fighting over Catholicism and getting married in the temple. So I think Aaron would say it was kind of a toss-up. But
because in Mormonism, you can only have one wife. Oh, wait. Sorry. Unless, wait.
On this
asterisk.
Asterisk.
Sorry, I didn't mean to hide
it. Serious open invite. Yeah. I would love for
that'd be very interesting.
For people in developing countries, more people of color, anything we can do to diversify the, what's coming through these microphones into your ears from more perspectives.
Kara, maybe today marks a turn in Mormon Stories history, February 2022, of a turn back towards more balanced, generous, good faith, assumptive, Mormon-themed podcasting. Maybe that started this month.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, let's do it.
Would that be all right?
Yeah.
listeners, would you hate us and stop supporting us if we actually tried to be as fair as possible and even generous-minded with the church?
Yeah. If I, again, so sorry, Spencer. If I can just say one thing.
Wait, are we interviewing someone? Is there someone here? Wait, Karen, it's a Karen John, like talking to each other. Oh, wait, who are you guys? Have I met you guys?
I'm here for the snacks. There's
commentary.
We're going to get so hammered by our viewers.
No,
we're not.
We are going to
We're having a good time.
We're going to get destroyed. I'm sorry.
All I want to
guys,
say
really.
is to that, John, I do really respect that John said that. And I think that this is a great, from Lizzy's episode to Spencer's episode, I feel like this is the most pro-Mormon. Sometimes I'll say that we are a pro-Mormon podcast because we're looking for the ways to improve the church, that we want the church to be able to better serve the people who are in it by, attacking like the systemic issues, whether it's child abuse or gender inequality. The list goes on. But in the ways that John's talking right now, if we don't talk about the things that made us love the church, that actually tied us to it, then it won't help people understand why we still care. Because the number one thing we get told is like,
is so painful.
Or why leaving is so painful. If we don't talk about that kind of stuff, people don't understand why you can't leave the church and leave it alone, which is what we always hear a million times a day. So I'm so glad that we've taken the time to talk about what we really love about this church, because John and I did like a 3-hour podcast a couple of weeks ago about what we love and hate about Mormon podcasting. And I finally been able to articulate the thing that's so hard is we at Mormon Stories want to be able to speak to people in the church, in the system that we want to better.
Right.
We want to speak to them. We don't want to alienate them. And if I do, I'm sorry. It's just the way that I am. But like, we want to be able to speak to you while also speaking to the people and validating people who have left the system, who are hurt by the system, validating their experience and stuff. So everyone just be patient with us as we're walking this like really intense tightrope to serve people in and out of it. And so I hope you guys have we're only halfway through of Spencer and Lizzy's journey through the church. Yeah. Two-thirds. Yeah. We're wrapping up Spencer's. We still have to talk about how you guys met and things like that. Yeah. Post-mission and stuff. So I hope everyone has really enjoyed like a really positive, introspective look at the good and bad of a typical Mormon upbringing.
Right. I mean, ultimately, you can't hate something that you didn't love first.
Oh, John Dylan quotables, folks.
That's not me. I mean, that's almost like a cliche.
Sure.
You have to love something
so succinctly, though.
You have to love something first to then hate. I mean, not always. If someone's just really brutal to you, of course, if they just kill and rape you and you don't know them, you're going to hate them.
Right.
But like normally, you hate something like an ex-spouse.
Right.
You hate the people that you once loved deeply.
And honestly, I would say it's probably less hate that you're feeling in that situation.
Well, some people feel hate.
Some people feel hate for sure, but I think for a lot of people, it is the fact that expectations no longer match reality, and it is that disconnect that is so difficult, because you do look at the church, or you look at an ex-spouse who you did love and who you can still recognize all the positive traits about that person, and it's hard. For me, it's less that I would hate the church or hate a person, and more that I would just hate the circumstances that brought that relationship to an end.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we maybe don't even have the words to describe what it is we're feeling.
Right.
Which is easy to just call it hate. And again, for some people, it might genuinely be.
Or anger.
But anger for sure.
Hate,
or sadness that is so deep and painful that you have that meta emotion of being angry that you're feeling so badly. You're angry at the emotions you're having, so it's this weird double thing.
Betrayal.
But
so many. It's
confusion.
It's nuanced. It is both. Mm-hmm. It's not one or the other. It is both.
Yeah.
And honestly, I mean, you talk about ex-Mormon Thanos. Up to this point in my Mormon story, I wouldn't change a thing. I wouldn't change a thing from being born in the church, baptized, priesthood, mission.
Even now. Yeah.
Even now,
Yeah.
I would not change a thing about my experience in the church. It was incredibly formative. Yeah. It gave me the launch pad that I needed to become the person that I want to become.
Which is why I was saying that the Mormon Missionary program is primarily for the members and for the church.
And even if it's not to necessarily tie them to the church, I think that's obviously part of it. But the church wants the most sturdy people who
Healthy.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if they can do things to improve the missionary program that gives you the best mental health, they should obviously be doing those.
They would
but
want
they
that.
want sturdy leaders, and I think the
And
missionary
healthy,
program,
adult, mature.
yeah, it brings in a lot of structure and maturity as well that the church is going to need to call later. So it just is all part of just making the church stronger. Yeah.
It's a brilliant part of Mormonism that ex-Mormonism may never be able to replicate. You can send them on, Salvation Army kind of things or little service trips, but nothing compares to a Mormon mission in terms of like forming character and skills. I don't know anything.
Yeah, no other place the furnace gets that hot,
Yeah.
Hey,
that's a
refiner's
good-
fire.
That's
a
what I'm
good
saying.
analogy.
Yeah.
So really quickly, as we're talking about the import of a Mormon mission to sealing a Mormon young adult to the church, can you tell us if your mission president gave you any advice, the stereotypical advice at the end of your Mormon mission? Because there's a Mormon step that comes right after the mission, and I'm wondering if you got that. I have no idea, but I'm just asking.
I did get that.
What's the speech?
Not as strongly as I've heard other people get theirs.
What's the general gist?
The general gist is, you have now served a mission. The next step is to get married. So your next mission, should you choose to accept it, is to go home and find the wife that has been prepared for you.
Yeah.
And normally the recommendation is what in terms of timing?
As soon as possible.
Yeah.
Get on it. This is your next thing.
Within the year.
Move.
Yeah,
within the year. Be married within the year is kind of like.
And this is why I was never given a time frame. It
Yeah.
was like, this is now your top priority. Like, make this your top priority. School, yes, important. Career, yes, important. But marriage, that's your next biggest thing. And that's why mine was a little softer than I think a lot of other people's who were given that time frame. But it definitely, they shift your focus immediately to now go find somebody.
Find your eternal companion.
Not just somebody. Go find the person, because you have been working your entire mission. You've been working your entire life
For Lizzy.
for Lizzy or whoever that person is. Now you just get to go find her.
Yeah.
And that's exciting.
Yeah,
I was
it is.
like really excited.
But
Yeah.
he was waiting for someone else.
Oh.
Dun dun dun.
All right. So before we talk about you guys, your courtship and marriage and all that, anything else about your individual story that is really important to your Mormon story that you want to mention before
Lizzy
ending
came into
part
the
2?
picture?
And yeah.
No,
Okay.
The rest of it's with Lizzy.
All right.
Thank goodness.
This was so much fun. Can I just say?
You having fun, Kara?
I am begging the commenters to tell me that you guys had as much fun as I did, or like a fraction of it, because this was a fun discussion.
Yeah.
It really was good.
Here's the deal. We take so much, I don't want to say a bad word. We take so much unpleasantries in our job that if we're having fun, you allow us a little bit of indulgence, because if you ever saw behind the scenes, you would say, poor Kara, poor John. Kara's telling me my hair doesn't even look good, so I need to get a haircut. My hair look bad. Sorry, everyone, for bad hair.
I just keep telling him his hair is. Well, his toupee
during
is
the
kind of
break,
off.
I'm going
He
to go get
needs
my
to.
haircut. Anyway,
Gosh.
so Spencer and Lizzy, thanks so
Yeah.
much for part 2 of your
Part
amazing
2.
story. And we still have part 3, which
Signed,
is
sealed, delivered.
how you guys got married and then went on a faith journey. That's going to be part 3. So we hope you've enjoyed part 2 of our interview with Spencer and Lizzy Bean.
It's been fun.
Kara, it's just amazing to always have you as running co-host. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for letting me have this job, and I get to bring in my friends and chat for my
But
job.
it's good chat.
It's a good chat.
See, we're
No,
not
you guys are
schlubs.
awesome.
They're
No,
We're
no.
not just a schmo.
No, you guys
We
are
got things to say.
you guys are top-notch humans, and it's just really fun. I can't wait for part 3.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We
We're looking
same.
forward to it.
All right. Well,
Save
thanks
the best
again.
for last.
Thanks, Kara, and thanks to you, listeners and viewers. We couldn't do this without your support. So for everyone who donates to the Open Stories Foundation, thank you. And we need support. Please join our other donors that make Kara possible, that make Jennifer, Gerardo, that make these amazing facilities possible. We want to keep it going. So please join our other supporters by becoming a monthly donor today at MormonStories.org. Just $10 a month, $50 a month, whatever you can afford. We'll keep the lights on and will allow us to keep doing this amazing work to help so many people through their faith crisis and into a happy, healthy life in or out of the church. So thanks, everybody. Check us out at MormonStories.org. That's where you can donate. Email us at MormonStories@gmail.com for any feedback you have. And then please follow us on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook, and just spread the word, and we'll keep doing amazing things. Thanks, everybody.
Take
care,
you.
guys.
Thanks.